So we are right now working our way through the core values that we had written back in 2021. Part of the reason why we're doing this is just a refresher. But part of the reason why is it kind of brings some things back that are very important for us as believers here at the Robinson Free Methodist Church. So I'll dive right in today to talk about how church is essential. Church is essential. And what I mean by church is not necessarily the building, not necessarily the people, but the exercise of public worship is an essential component of our life. Now, if you're like me, you remember this season in our lives not too many years ago, where the coronavirus epidemic was really putting people into a really weird position. And we're being told what is essential, what is not essential, and maybe you were like me in this whole process. Maybe the whole thing left you confused. Anybody get confused during coronavirus? Yeah. Anybody get a little upset during corona? Yeah. But we were probably confused and upset over different things. Maybe not. But let's see how much agreement that we have here this morning. What did you think of the government's use of the term essential, especially with the idea of an essential worker? I went and pulled this off of one of the government websites, and I just want to hit the highlight here for you. An essential worker is a person who performs vital tasks to maintain society's function. And so we would think about these people, and of course, the healthcare was essential, and public safety was essential, and those people who were delivering goods were essential, and those people maintaining critical infrastructure and supporting communications are essential. But look at how they defined it at the bottom. Essential workers are crucial for society's stability and well-being. Keep that in your mind. Society's stability and well-being. Now, I was looking at that as I looked at it then, and I thought to myself, there are conspicuous parts of our society that are left out of this. Parts like anything regarding God, or church, or spiritual leadership. That was kind of just missing in the whole bit. And then there was also missing in this, under the definition of essential, anything regarding the stable family. So we took out God, church, we took out spiritual leadership, we took out anything regarding the family, and we put other things under the term essential. But if we didn't put these things under the term essential, could that have meant that the government did not see them as essential? Maybe they saw them as not essential. Could it be, perhaps, that our government in its agenda no longer considers these missing things as critical for society's functioning? A little bit of homework. If you go back to the Spanish flu, a little bit of homework there would quickly allow you to see how influential the church was during the Spanish flu. And 100 years later, it was written off as a non-essential. Now, I'm convinced, in part because of this master's program that I'm working through, that our progressive-leaning government attempts to find solutions for the roles that weren't mentioned here by social work and societal engineering. So here's the thought. They believe that we can reap the benefits of God's blessing but neglect a personal responsibility to God. So they're saying to you that if you put the right minds together, the right people, and if you give them enough money, they can give you what God would give you, and you don't need God at all. Is anybody seeing this? Yeah? I got to ask you, how's that strategy working for them? I don't think it is. And so these two institutions that they said, well, you really don't need it. Remember Hillary Clinton wrote, it takes a village, right? You don't need parents, you need the village. They're saying you don't need the church to have a functioning society. And you don't need the family to have a functioning society. We can do it without them. Here's the problem. These are the two institutions that God himself created. Remember what happened when Eve was brought to Adam? When Adam finally got his tongue rolled back into his mouth, he looked at Eve and went, he heard what God said. For this cause, man will leave father and mother and cleave to his wife, and they will be one flesh, one family. And then about the church. When the church was proclaimed, Jesus is with his disciples. And Jesus says to his disciples, who am I? And this one over here is like, well, you're this famous prophet. And this one over here is like, you're the reincarnated spirit of this dead guy. And Peter looks at Jesus and he goes, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus turns around to Peter and he says, hey, Peter, you get it. And this is what I'm going to build my church upon. People who get it. And when I build my church, the gates of hell will not prevail against it. So what was Jesus doing by proclaiming the institution of the church? He was saying the church, and as this is fleshed out over time, the church is formed on a common ideal that Jesus is Lord. And even though there is a diversity of denominations, Jesus is Lord is what unites us. And if people don't believe that Jesus is Lord, they can be the nicest people in the world. They can have cookies at their functions. They can invite you in and make you feel amazing and wanted and loved. But they are not teaching the Jesus of the Bible. Because it's Jesus is Lord. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. So if Jesus is not proclaimed as Lord, it's not a good church. But let's go a little bit deeper about why it's so essential. Why is church so essential? Hitting the highlights that are listed in your bulletin insert. Why does the church exist? Why are we here? The first part is the idea this is the place where you receive sound biblical doctrine. We find that in Ephesians chapter 4:14. Furthermore, this is the place of fellowship, where the goal here is for Christians to be brothers and sisters with each other, devoted to each other, and honor each other. That's out of Romans chapter 12, verse 10. There are times that we instruct each other, which is out of Romans 15:14. There are times that we must be kind and compassionate to each other, out of Ephesians 4:32, to encourage each other out of 1 Thessalonians 5:11, and most importantly, the number one call of the church is to love one another. Jesus said, they will know you are Christians by your good preaching. They will know you're Christians by how much money you give away. Ron, how will they know if you're a Christian? By your what? Just say love. That's a good answer. All right. They will know that you are Christians by your love. This is what the church was created for. The church is to be a place where you can come and partake of the sacraments. Do you know, Free Methodists, what our sacraments are? Baptism and the Lord's Supper. So we want to make sure that when you come here, this can be a place where you can partake of those. And that's out of 1 Corinthians 11:23-26. And then the church is a place where we pray, where we promote prayer, where we teach prayer, and where we practice prayer. You'll see texts for that in Acts chapter 2:42 and Philippians chapter 4:6 and 7. The church is not for the people who are here alone. This has been a big problem at times because people will think it's my church. And when you get the idea that it's my church, that means it's not somebody else's church, right? mean, come on now. Jesus saves us so that we can come to the table and get a big old spiritual belly and eat and partake every single week, right? Why does Jesus save us? So that we can be filled, made alive, made energetic, and then go into the places where we live and work and actually look like there's something different in us than in them. And so we burn off all of what we receive by being the hands and feet of Jesus to a world that's desperate for him. The church promotes and prepares its members to proclaim the gospel. That's 1 Peter 3:15. And finally, the church is to be about the business of ministering to those people who are in need. I want to make it very clear. What we're doing in hosting 3Cs is an exercise of that. What we did in building a kitchen is an exercise of that. It's our way as a church of creating a tool that can touch people in a very real, practical way. So that's out of James chapter 1:27. Now, I want you to consider all of these things that I just shared with you, and you probably only remember one or two. If you're like me, your mind spaced a little bit for a moment. But which one of these things was unessential during the pandemic? Which one of these things did we not need? Do you see where I'm going? That either the church is essential and public worship is essential, or the government got it wrong. You ever notice the government to get things wrong? Okay, moving along. So we have these two institutions that God has created, the church and the family. I want to focus on both today, but I really just want to hit the church for just a minute here as it ties into our core value. Hebrews 10:25 says, "And let us not neglect the meeting together, as some people do, but encourage one another all the more that you see the day approaching." Now, the writer of Hebrews, he doesn't promote Christians sheltering in place. I got to say that again. The writer of Hebrews does not promote Christians sheltering in place. And you might be like, well, it's a whole different world back then, Aaron. It really wasn't. You see, they faced something that we as Americans didn't face. They faced persecutions. And do you remember the story of Paul? When Paul was in Jerusalem, he was kicking down doors. He was like the holy rabbi, SEAL Team 6 guy, kicking down doors, pulling Christians out, throwing them into prison. When's the last time that happened in Robinson, Illinois? So here's the thing. We had a government telling us, stay in place, can't get, you're sick, don't show up. These people were going through persecutions where they came to their house, they kicked down their door, and they dragged them away to prison. And then when Paul thought, oh, this is so good, he decides he's taking his act on the road, and that's where he meets Jesus because he was going to Damascus to start the whole process all over again. So this idea that the Bible encourages us to shelter in place, man, I'm not so sure. And that was the lighter of the persecutions that the Hebrews would have faced. See, there was a persecution that happened. They have the dating of Hebrews somewhere between 50 and 60 AD. Prior to 50 AD, there was this persecution that specifically focused on Hebrews, Jews. And they basically took the Jews out of the city and kicked them all out, took their land, took their property, took everything they had, and basically said, you're out, we don't want any Jews here, go. All right, this happened in Rome. About 30 years later, a guy named Nero decides that the Christians are the epidemic on Roman culture. And he decides he is going to do everything possible to discourage Christianity. Now, between those two things, the writer of Hebrews is writing. And again, I ask you to consider, he's the one, the writer of Hebrews, who just got done with our text right there saying, even though things are going to get really bad, don't forsake the assembling together, all the more as you see the day approaching. This book addresses suffering and what Christians should do with suffering. In 1032, just a little bit after this text, it said, "Recall the former days when you, after you were enlightened, you endured a hard struggle with sufferings." And goes on to describe the abuse they received. I already talked about this. Let me move on. Okay. So, basically what Paul is doing in encouraging the people to come together, he is putting power in proximity. All right? Do you ever have a conversation with someone and they're like way across the room? "Steve, how you doing?" "I'm great, Aaron, how are you?" And you know, people get in the way of that, don't they? Or did you ever, like when you were kids, take the cup and put the string on it and play telephone? Man, it was cool until it wasn't. Because there were always things that would break the chain. And what I'm proposing to you is Paul was saying that Christianity is meant to be lived out in proximity. You got to be able to touch people. You got to be in their presence. You've got to be together to fulfill the purposes of the church that we just went over. And how close do you have to be? Let's have a test here of our faithful congregation this morning. How close do you have to be? How many of you guys had Zoom meetings during the pandemic? Okay? How many of you felt they were as good as sitting face to face? Not one person?
Depends on whether you like the guy or not.
Yeah. Oh, I believe here's your answer, guys. You know, basically the idea here is we are a people God has created for proximity and fellowship. Now, what's been interesting to me, I went a little further into this as I was researching Hebrews 10:25, and what it said was really interesting to me. I know maybe you're aware right now, but everybody has AI now, right? And so I looked at Yahoo's AI as it talked about Hebrews 10:25. And this is why he said that, the AI said that this verse is important. It says, of Hebrews 10:25, we are encouraged to prioritize community, make attending church gathering a top commitment, to strengthen those in faith, to support each other, offer encouragement, prayers, and assistance to fellow believers in a supportive community, to cherish fellowship, value the importance of coming together in worship, to be consistent, regularly participate in church gatherings, help maintain spiritual growth and connection with others, to build unity, cultivate unity among believers through shared experiences, to uphold accountability, engage in honest conversation, and hold each other accountable. This is what AI is saying of Hebrews 10:25. That sounds like a preacher wrote it. I found it very funny that a developing technology would be so honest about the purpose of the church. I even found it more funny because I was convinced that programmer bias would have written that out somehow, but it didn't. And so in 2021, as our 8th core value, we wrote this: public worship is essential and thus critical for personal and congregational health and holiness. Church is essential. And it becomes more essential all the more as we see the day approaching for Jesus to come back. It is essential because of how it serves us personally and how it serves the congregational need of spiritual health and holiness. And we will value church through our efforts and attendance in good times or in bad. And kind of for your information, if church is essential, means the preacher's essential. They don't get to define my work either. And as I close this part of the message, I want to ask you if you believe it. I want to ask you if you believe what I'm talking about, okay? Because if you do, actions matter. Don't say church is essential and not make a point to prioritize your life right now to having your family as a part of public worship. You see, our world needs consistency from its Christians. Hello? Let me touch on one other thing before we go. We talked about how the church is essential. We talked about how the family is essential. I want to use today, and in the next 5 minutes or so, focus on the essential role of the father. Fathers and mothers working together are critical for the shaping of our children for the benefit of society. It takes both, right? But allow me to take the next few moments and address the other institution, the family, the one that the government overlooked. And as today's Father's Day, let's talk about the essential role of the fathers. Moms and dads, they see things differently. Moms are often super protective. They have this mindset that might come out, my baby, right? And that can lead to a desire with moms to shield their children from negative experiences, sometimes to the point of overprotection. Anybody understand what I mean? Yeah, right? Dads look at things a little different. Dads look at things and go, well, they'll learn. Right? Come on, dads. Right? That's the way it works. You have a watchful eye over your children, but dads look at it as, you know what? Maybe having a negative experience will help them grow a little bit more, and maybe letting them fall and pick themselves up and dust themselves off is okay. Kids need both perspectives, all right? It's important that there are both. But might I suggest to you that we are in a generation, I believe we can argue, because of the lack of the father's role, is facing anxiety like never before. There's the two perspectives. Let me dive into that a little bit more as we talk about this. Moms and dads, they share an awesome responsibility in raising their kids, but let me talk to fathers for just a moment. If I could sum up the role of a father, it's the same as the role of a Christian. The primary role is to love. But how we love makes a very unique difference in how our wives and our children see their future. And I'll sum it up this way. First off, guys, before we can love our wives or love our children, we have to love God. And we have to be growing in that relationship with God. And I'll tell you, the thing that oftentimes does the most damage is when fathers proclaim a love for God, but their lifestyle doesn't show it. And kids, especially boys, are very perceptive. So if you are going to embrace that role of the father, your first and foremost responsibility is to love God first. You'll find more about that in Mark chapter 12, verse 30. Secondly, love your wife. Love their mother, and demonstrate that love as your first commitment. Loving their mother, we'll dive into that again in just a moment. Love your children. Some of the greatest ways you can love your children is by being present and by giving them something that I'll call mattress failure, and I'll dive into that in just a moment too. But the final thing I think it's important, men, that we do as we love is that we love the church. And we lead the family, not just your family, but we lead the family in faith. So to kind of flesh this out for a moment, to love God, without a personal love for God, the love in other areas in our lives, it's just empty words and platitudes. It's just going through the motions. This is why Jesus calls us, man or woman, to love God with how much of our heart? All of it, right? All signifies an ever-increasing surrender to Him. And it sets the foundation for every bit of love that you'll be able to offer in the future. Fathers, your children are watching how you love your wife. And one of the things that I read one time blew my mind as the Bible talks about loving our wives as the weaker vessel. Sometimes our hairy-chested chauvinism comes out and it's like, dang right, I'm stronger than that woman. I could take her in a fight. Some of you could, I suppose. My point in this is that he gave me a different picture for this that I've just treasured since he's done it. When we're talking about the weaker vessel, I like the idea of not necessarily focusing on the difference in strength, but focusing on the difference in value. You see, all of us men have something that we treasure, we love, and what do? We put it in lights. It might be that deer head, yeah? It might be that hunting rifle. It might be that picture of the guys that was a part of that special trip. But we have it at a central located spot. When someone comes into the room and they see it, we can tell the story about it. And we love to tell the story about it. And see, I believe that when God is instructing us to love our wives as the weaker vessel, what I believe He is saying to us is give her that position of prominence. You see, a lot of guys, they talk down to their wives. A lot of guys, as they relate to their wives, they might talk nice to their wives, but to their friends or to their family, they're talking down to them. Did you hear what my wife did? Did you ever think that someone could be that silly as to not put oil in the car? Or, these things, again, they're things that as guys we think, well, who shouldn't know something like that? Well, obviously, if she didn't, she doesn't. And what she doesn't need is someone talking down to her. And see, if we are valuing her from the perspective of she is that treasured vessel, whoever talked down about their deer head? It wasn't your deer head, right? But that deer head that's, have you ever seen a rack that big, right? And I could tell you the story, 7,000 yards, I shot him in the eyeball, right? This is how guys think. And we're really good at talking positively about what we value. And if we're not talking positively about our wives, guess who's watching? Guess who's listening? How about loving our children? Loving our children, fathers can be hard on sons. It's a fact. But in many ways, let's be very candid. This is, again, why we need the balance of male and female. Sometimes fathers can be too hard. Sometimes fathers aren't hard enough. Because I firmly believe that it is fathers who make sons, fathers who make men. Amen? Men make men. Fathers make men. The Bible acknowledges that we can go too far with our words. And so Colossians 3:21 says, be restrained. Our love is for our children, especially our sons. It is expressed through discipline. However, we have to find the right balance. The Bible acknowledges that fathers can err with words. So Colossians 3:21 advises us to be restrained. Remember, as fathers, we are also under the discipline of the Heavenly Father. Reflect how you would want to be treated by God towards the situation and treat your sons accordingly. So I call it mattress failure. It's kind of like this. I've met fathers who, if you don't do everything perfect, you're an idiot. You can't do anything right. How many times do I have to show you, boy? I think we're going to make a lot more hay, fellas, if instead of throwing a concrete block under our falling children, if we threw a mattress. And when they fall, and fall they will because so did you, let them hit that mattress. Let it be something that provides a buffer for them. Get them up, pick them up, smack them on the rear, and say, let's get going. Am I making sense? Instead of letting them fall and get lost. I need to wrap this up. Be a mattress. And finally, love the church. We need men and women to bring the distinctiveness in leading the church. Men and women. Men, we need to focus on this area. Our history is to go where we feel needed. And many times we have conceded our role in leadership because we did not feel needed in the church. The problem is not women's leadership of the church. The problem is that too many men have not added their leadership to the mix. And so the Bible says male and female, He created them. God saw the benefit of adding both perspectives into His creation. And so fellas, we need you. But remember that the New Testament puts a unique role on you. It says before you lead the church, lead your family. Did you hear that? Before you lead the church, lead your family. After loving God, leading your family is your first priority. So I had two goals for this message. Number one, to remind you of the essential nature of the church service. Don't let someone take away again something of such vital importance. But secondly, as fathers, to remind each of you of the essential role that you play in your family. Fathers, you're important. To quote one of my favorite movies, what we do in life echoes in eternity. And so men, whether with our own children or whether if you're getting a second chance with your grandchildren, men, where you have a father's influence or a role in your life or in community, let's make a point to lead with more than words. Let's be the examples. Let's bring it home even right now as I close this up. On your study sheet, they told us in preaching class that the best preaching always brings people to a conclusion, a next step. And so here's what I'm going to put in front of you as your next step, and we're done. After hearing this today about the essential role of men, of fathers, of grandfathers, what do you need to do? What's the next step for you? How can you take this message and grow from it? If you have a sheet there, write it down. If you don't, think about it. Because don't let another message that God has given you hit your heart and then roll off and miss the point.